I love my children so much, I would never. Brian Williams wrote, hit them. Ice-T wrote, leave them. Celine Dion wrote, sing in front of them. And right before I go on stage, I tell myself, Bono wrote, relax and have fun. Justin Timberlake wrote, it's go time. And Britney Spears wrote, don't move your lips until you hear your voice. When I was a kid, I broke. Jennifer Aniston wrote my arm. Tom Cruise wrote my ankle. Michael Moore wrote a diving board. And my guilty pleasure is Gwyneth Paltrow wrote eating ice cream. David Duchovny wrote watching soap operas. O.J. Simpson wrote killing my ex-wife. My first pet was, Barbara Walters said, a rabbit. Kelly Ripa said, a cat. Star Jones said, delicious. And nobody knows I can. David Duchovny wrote, speak Italian. Stone Phillips wrote, speak Russian. Arnold Schwarzenegger wrote, speak English. And you see how it works. When I want to create a romantic mood, I put on, Colin Farrell wrote Barry White. Alec Baldwin wrote Sade. Mike Tyson wrote a ski mask. The last thing I say to my wife every night is, Kevin Bacon wrote, I love you. Tim Robbins wrote, sweet dreams. Bill Clinton wrote, I'll be back in 8 hours. I trained my dog to, Tom Selleck wrote, catch a frisbee. It's nice. Brittany Murphy wrote, bring me the newspaper. It's nice. Ruben Studdard wrote, butter itself and then leap into my mouth. Despite my fame and fortune, I still do all my own. Kate Winslet wrote, house cleaning. Gisele Bundchen wrote, grocery shopping. O.J. Simpson wrote, murdering. My advice to parents is, Juliana Margulies wrote, set a good example for your children. Tom Hanks wrote, accept your kids for who they are. Michael Jackson wrote, shut up and take the $2 million. And I think women say I remind them of, Dick Van Patten wrote, their dad. Donald Trump wrote, their boss. Joan Rivers wrote, their mortality. I hate being recognized when I'm... Sting wrote, on vacation. Larry King wrote, in the supermarket. O.J. Simpson wrote, killing people. When I was young, there were a lot fewer. Tom Selleck wrote TV channels. John Mayer wrote computers. Larry King wrote continents. I knew for sure my baby was mine when Chris Martin wrote, she hummed a simple tune. That's nice. Chris Rock wrote, she laughed at one of my jokes. That's nice. Ben Affleck wrote, she pooped in her diaper and charged me $9.50 to see it. One city that's not as much fun as it sounds is, Penn Jillette wrote Las Vegas. Natalie Portman wrote Hollywood. Michael Jackson wrote Boise. My favorite time of day is, Evangeline Lilly wrote early morning. Matt Lauer wrote twilight. O.J. Simpson wrote murder o'clock. I think Barack Obama is, Bill Richardson wrote a tough opponent. Rudy Giuliani wrote too inexperienced to be president. George W. Bush wrote, something genies say. He's kind of got a point. Barack Obama. Sometimes I check into hotels under the name, Halle Berry wrote Carla Reeves. Josh Hartnett wrote Jed Hartford. O.J. Simpson wrote Slasho McMurderson. Most people die, Scarlett Johansson wrote, with too many regrets. Russell Crowe wrote, before their time. Larry King wrote, but not me. You know the honeymoon's over when Elizabeth Taylor wrote, he spends the weekends with his friends. Barbara Streisand wrote, he leaves the house without telling you where he's going. Michael Jackson wrote, his voice changes. And I thought, I can't wait until my baby is old enough to say, Ben Stiller wrote, I love you, Daddy. It's very nice. Mariska Hargitay wrote, hug me, Mommy. Donald Trump wrote, Rosie O'Donnell is a fat, fat loser. Say it. At my age, I never thought I'd be, well, Andre Agassi wrote, in the quarterfinals of the U.S. Open, which is nice. John Roberts wrote, nominated to be Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. And Larry King wrote, outliving tortoises. He's actually... Sometimes I have trouble seeing past my... Scarlett Johansson wrote, preconceptions about people. Sean Penn wrote, liberal bias. Nicole Richie wrote, clown-sized sunglasses. That is an undoctored photo, by the way. When I saw tons of food getting delivered to New Orleans, Alec Baldwin wrote, thought this is America at its best. Tim Robbins wrote, gave a prayer of thanks. Kirstie Alley wrote, renamed my mouth New Orleans. I believe the Hamas victory in the recent Palestinian elections means, well, Condoleezza Rice wrote, a corresponding tilt toward the right in the Israeli Knesset. Dick Cheney wrote, a widening rift between disenfranchised radicals and the Fatah Party. President Bush wrote, Hamas, I love that stuff on my pita chips. When it comes to the seven dwarves, I'm most like, Ethan Hawke wrote, sleepy. Owen Wilson wrote, dopey. O.J. Simpson wrote, murdery. He was edited out of the original for murdering everyone. One thing my kids take for granted that I wish I'd grown up with is Tom Hanks wrote TiVo. Bob Costas wrote the internet. Larry King wrote Flint spearheads. My most embarrassing moment was when Jason Bateman wrote, got beat up in high school. Laura Dern wrote, tried to sing in public. Arnold Schwarzenegger wrote, got my Freudenschnitzel got in the Schnickelgrube. My first crush was, Mandy Moore wrote, Matthew Feiner, the boy next door. Brian Williams wrote, Mrs. Fitzgerald, my third grade teacher. Larry King wrote, Anat, the Pharaoh's daughter. The worst gift I got this year was, John Mayer wrote, a sweater. Kenny G wrote, my latest album. Stevie Wonder wrote, I can't tell, but it feels like Kenny G's latest album. I consider my finest career moment to be, Hilary Swank wrote, when I won my first Oscar for Boys Don't Cry. Chris Rock wrote, when I was first hired on Saturday Night Live. Larry King wrote, when I realized that by using a small stone wheel, we could transport the great rocks along the River Nile to build the Pharaoh's tomb. My favorite quote from a Humphrey Bogart movie is, Harrison Ford wrote, it's the stuff dreams are made of. Julianne Moore wrote, we'll always have Paris. Michael Jackson wrote, here's looking at you, kid. People often confuse me with, Martha Stewart wrote, Diane Sawyer. Luke Wilson wrote, my brother Owen. Joan Rivers wrote, Shamuk, a creature from Yiddish folklore. In high school, I had to choose between hanging out with, Harrison Ford wrote, my buddies or my girlfriend. Tom Arnold wrote, the jocks or the nerds. Larry King wrote, the pterodactyls or the trilobites. The question I am most often asked is, Jennifer Connelly wrote, what are you working on? Cameron Diaz wrote, will you read my screenplay? O.J. Simpson wrote, why are you stabbing me? I miss the simplicity of, Jeff Goldblum said, calling customer service and getting to speak with a real person. Steve Martin said, having a phone that just makes phone calls. Larry King said, all the continents being connected as a single landmass. You could ride a stegosaurus from North America to Eurasia without getting your pelt wet. I come from a mixed marriage because, Halle Berry said, my mom is white and my dad is black. Jake Gyllenhaal said, my dad is Swedish and my mom is Jewish. Vin Diesel said, my dad is fast and my mom is furious. My favorite historical figure is Alec Baldwin wrote Abraham Lincoln because of his brave determination. Neil deGrasse Tyson said Isaac Newton because of his revolutionary thinking. Larry King said Christopher Columbus because he'd let me steer the ship. I like to remind voters that I voted for. Ted Cruz said the Keystone Pipeline. Hillary Clinton said the immigration reform bill. Bernie Sanders said the Louisiana Purchase. Yeah. Every year I go in for my annual. Courtney Cox said checkup. Kevin Nealon said physical. Larry King said autopsy. I wish people would stop confusing me for. Josh Gad said Jonah Hill. Retta said Viola Davis. Johnny Depp said a gypsy's yard sale. The best piece of advice my father ever gave me was, Timothy Oliphant said, save your money for a rainy day. Emily Blunt said, always pursue your dreams. Larry King said, don't throw your spear until the mastodon is upon you. If I weren't running for president, I would be, Hillary Clinton said, acting as a political consultant. Jeb Bush said, continuing with my charity work promoting literacy. Bernie Sanders said, screaming at a nurse to turn up the volume on the television. I started using bronzer. Marissa Miller said, for photo shoots. Bradley Cooper said, for publicity shots. Larry King said, during the Bronze Age. On election night, it's so exciting to see. Jason Segel wrote, who wins and who loses. Ellie Kemper wrote, which propositions pass and which don't. Kim Jong-un wrote, who voted for me and who will be killed. My dad was the first man to. Barry Bonds wrote, hit 300 homers and steal 400 bases. Lisa Marie Presley wrote, have 15 #1 hits. Larry King wrote, walk upright. You can never have too many. Amy Poehler wrote, Friends. Judd Apatow wrote, Ideas. Kanye West wrote, Mirrors with the blinking word Kanye above them. When the director first called me about the movie Noah, Jennifer Connelly wrote, I thought this sounds interesting. Russell Crowe wrote, I realized I always wanted to do a biblical epic. Larry King wrote, he asked me if I wanted to play myself. I'm constantly reminding people that I'm not. Jessica Biel wrote, Jessica Alba. Zooey Deschanel wrote, Katy Perry. Steven Tyler wrote, dryer lint that's come to life. I took Latin in school because Dr. Sanjay Gupta wrote, I wanted to become a doctor. Kat Dennings wrote, I thought it would help my SATs. Larry King wrote, I grew up during the Roman Empire. I'm a mixture of. Tiger Woods wrote, African-American, Thai, and Dutch. Vin Diesel wrote German, English, and Italian. Steven Tyler wrote pirate, gypsy, and cat-scratching code. I probably won't see the movie Noah because Olivia Wilde wrote, it doesn't appeal to me. David Cross wrote, I'm not very religious. Larry King wrote, I was bullied by Noah in high school. If I ever make it to heaven, the first thing I'd say to God is, Jennifer Lawrence said, thank you for a wonderful life. That's sweet. Ron Howard said, what does it all mean? Kanye West said, please, no autographs. The first time I went to Europe, I traveled by. Steve Carell said, airplane. Julia Louis-Dreyfus said, cruise ship. Larry King said, land bridge. When I'm in bed, I like to. Carol Burnett wrote, read a book. Seth Meyers wrote, watch TV. Gary Busey wrote, undo the restraints with my teeth. The first time I saw the Stones was, Whoopi Goldberg wrote, in Chicago. Vince Vaughn wrote, at Madison Square Garden. Larry King wrote, when the oceans receded. Since I was a child, I've been afraid of, Jeff Goldblum said, spiders. Kristen Bell said ghosts. Bernie Sanders said combs. I'll never forgive myself for. Jason Sudeikis said missing my brother's graduation. Emma Stone said once cheating on an algebra test. Larry King said telling the Romans where Jesus was hiding. People always ask, what are you doing here when I'm in a... Brad Pitt wrote Walmart. George Clooney wrote McDonald's. Steven Tyler wrote Men's Room. I remember what a big deal it was when they came out with... Jesse Eisenberg wrote The Laptop Computer. Sharon Osbourne wrote The Color Television. Larry King wrote The Moon. After having a child, I realized there's nothing more important than... Julie Bowen wrote Love and Support. Piers Morgan wrote Sacrifice and Devotion. Kanye West wrote Kanye West. I was so sad when they tore down, Roseanne Barr said, Mile High Stadium. Erin Burnett said the old Metropolitan Opera House. Larry King said the Tower of Babel. Apparently that really bummed him out. I lend my face to... Angelina Jolie wrote International Women's Causes. Ted Danson wrote Environmental Causes. Mickey Rourke wrote Children's Nightmares. When I need to make small talk, I usually say, Anthony Anderson said, where did you grow up? Lisa Kudrow said, what are you reading these days? Larry King said, where were you when you heard Caesar got stabbed? Enough! Please! My favorite Ben and Jerry's flavor is, Jeff Goldblum wrote Chubby Hubby. Aubrey Plaza wrote Chunky Monkey. Donald Trump wrote Trumpy Trumpy. I found the historical details accurate in the movie. Tom Brokaw wrote Saving Private Ryan. Maya Angelou wrote The Help. Larry King wrote Ice Age. Arnold Schwarzenegger taking over Celebrity Apprentice is, Sylvester Stallone said, a surprising career move by an old friend. Donald Trump said, a worthy successor to my legacy. NBC Chairman Bob Greenblatt said, an impossible challenge for the closed captioning industry.
You're gonna go to see Snapper down in the Wall Street.
My parents got so angry the day I came home with... Christina Aguilera wrote Tattoos. Nicole Richie wrote Piercings. Larry King wrote Opposable Thumbs. People tell me I look a lot like Joe Biden said, my father. Carly Fiorina said, my grandmother. Ted Cruz said, someone took the comedy and tragedy masks and melted them together. On the very first date, Jack McBrayer wrote went bowling. Jennifer Aniston wrote went to a movie. Larry King wrote slithered onto land. I never leave the house without my... Colin Farrell said Irish pendant. Jennifer Aniston said wedding ring. Steven Tyler said government-issued ID that proves I'm not a broom. To teach me about art, my parents would drag me to. Elijah Wood wrote the Guggenheim. John Krasinski wrote the Art Institute of Chicago. Larry King wrote a cave. The only thing that can really hurt me is, Dwayne Johnson said a sucker punch. Christina Aguilera said a bad review. Jeff Sessions said a strong wind when my ears are at full mast. Yeah. I knew I was getting older when Harrison Ford said I needed my glasses to see my clock. Betty White said I got winded walking up one flight of stairs. Larry King said I had trouble hearing the Big Bang. People don't recognize me without, Slash said a top hat and guitar. Tom Selleck said my mustache. Steve Bannon said slave Leia chained to my side. I was at the Senate the day Joe Biden said passed Obamacare. Elizabeth Warren said amend the Marriage Equality Act. Larry King said stabbed Julius Caesar repeatedly. I think in another life I was probably, Donald Trump said, a Roman emperor. Hillary Clinton said a famous explorer. Bernie Sanders said a loose pile of white yarn. I remember my dad saying, Terry Crews said, put yourself in someone else's shoes. Ted Danson said, early to bed and early to rise. Larry King said, let there be light. My favorite thing about spring is, Russell Brand said, getting outdoors again. Melissa McCarthy said, seeing the flowers in bloom. Mitch McConnell said, crawling onto the beach with my fellow turtles to lay our eggs. In high school, I was voted. Rachel McAdams said, most likely to succeed. Timothy Oliphant said, most likely to be famous. Larry King said, most likely to walk on land. When kids see me, they always say, Chris Pratt said, it's Peter from Guardians of the Galaxy. Daniel Radcliffe said, it's Harry Potter. Tommy Lee Jones said, Mommy, why is that tree mad at us? I didn't grow up celebrating Christmas because Dr. Sanjay Gupta said I was raised Hindu. Kumail Nanjiani said I was raised Muslim. Larry King said, Jesus wasn't born yet. I'm sick of being judged for my, Tom Hanks wrote, early movie roles. Jennifer Aniston wrote romantic decisions. O.J. Simpson wrote murders. I spent my youth protesting against the, Martin Sheen said, Vietnam War. Jenna Elfman said Iraq War. Larry King said Trojan War. Wow. I thought, yeah. When my time comes, I want to be, George R.R. Martin wrote Buried at Sea. Colin Farrell wrote Buried in Ireland. Joan Rivers wrote Remelted into squeaky toys for my dogs. I'm always worried I'm disappointing, Jake Gyllenhaal said, my critics. Anna Kendrick said, my fans. Larry King said, the Grim Reaper. Now...